Okay, good afternoon. Just getting started here. Welcome to a Shushan Purim. Today is the hangover day, whatever you want to call it, right? But the day after Purim. Just give a second here. Okay, so I got the wrong thing here. As you know, that in the weeks from Rosh Chodesh Adar until Passover, there are 4 special Torah readings that we add besides the regular Torah reading that we read. So this week, while we began the book of Leviticus last week, we also are reading, and it becomes this week as the second Torah reading of the book of Leviticus. We are also reading the 4 extra special Torah readings, which last week we read Zachor, and this week we're going to be reading Parshas Parah. Parshas Parah is about the commandment of the red heifer. Everything in the Torah is relevant, and especially it's contemporary and relevant every single day and every single time and every age. The word Torah comes from the word Torah. It's a lesson in life, and therefore everything that we can learn and study in the Torah, even as we learned last week and we discussed the laws about the sacrifices, and this week we're going to talk about the law pertaining to the red heifer as well, which has its relevance and pertinence and how it's related to in our day-to-day life. And we're going to look at this week as the laws pertaining to the red heifer and find its relevance and see how we can find a practical application in our day-to-day life and what it can teach us. So what is the Torah reading about the red heifer? It is the Torah reading that we know that King Solomon said, I've studied every single one of the 613 mitzvahs. Each one of them I was able to find some type of rationale, explanation, and try to bring its relevance to it. But all of a sudden it came to this mitzvah of the red heifer. I don't have a solution. I don't understand it. What didn't he understand? What was the problem that King Solomon didn't understand about the red heifer? So the red heifer, many want to say what he didn't understand was the details of it and what it may be. But we know the red heifers, as we know in the Torah, there are 3 types of mitzvahs. There's a mitzvah which is called edus, which is testimony. For example, Shabbat, which every single Shabbos we make Kiddush and we celebrate the Shabbos to remember the time that God rested. Then there's the mitzvah of, for example, of not to kill, not to steal. Those are called mishpatim, as we discussed in the book of Exodus. Those are rational laws. And then there's our mitzvahs, a category called chukim, which are laws which have no understanding, no explanation. For example, not mixing wool and linen, and keeping laws of kosher, and so on, which one does not have a rational reason of what you can logically explain. One of those things that you would include in the mitzvah of supra-rational mitzvahs is the laws of purity and impurity, which you seemingly don't have really an explanation or rationale to it. So some want to say this is what King Solomon was alluding to. But why is this different than any other mitzvah that's a chukah that King Solomon didn't understand? So there must be that even though the Torah does tell us the mitzvahs and we can't understand its rationale, there is definitely a hint of what we can understand and a deeper explanation of what this means. So what was it that King Solomon couldn't understand? So what King Solomon was struggling with is something very unique, as we're soon going to explore in the mitzvah of the Parah Adumah, of the red heifer, which is as this same exact red heifer, which purifies one individual, contaminates another individual. And we'll soon explain what this means. And King Solomon couldn't understand how is it possible that you have one item, one idea, that at the same time while it purifies one person, it hurts another person. How was that possible? And we're going to look at it from 2 different angles and 2 different things that the Torah is alluding to with this. Number one, it is teaching us of what sometimes we ask in God. We'll look at the world and we see how is this, so to speak, a balanced world where the righteous are seemingly being punished and the evil are the ones that are being glorified. Or at the same time, we also ask, how is it possible that many different unanswered questions of why a person may have done nothing wrong in his life is suffering or dies young or whatever it may be, not that we have the answers from it, but where at least we can get some understanding and appreciation of how to approach it and how to look at it. And looking at it from the angles that the Rebbe teaches us, who was there listening to the pain and suffering and giving everybody hope, the greatest therapist of all, teaching us how to deal with a person who's going through pain, and how we can deal with crisis, and how we can feel and participate and empathize with somebody whose heart may be broken. about teaching us it's not about standing on the outside, but it's actually being part and stepping inside and being part of the other person's issues, and to be able to deal with that person and understand and appreciate what a person's going through. You can't just be aloof, but you have to actually immerse yourself, so to speak, into what the person's going through, taking part of their pain and recognizing where they're coming from. And of course, this has a greater and deeper understanding, not only when it comes to pain, but even more so when it comes to education and teaching somebody what we can do and how to help somebody get out of the mud and get out of the rut of whatever they're stuck in. And giving a person the ability to see the beauty in life is not just by preaching, but is actually being there with them. So let's take a deeper dive into what we're talking about. So as we mentioned earlier, there are 4 special Torah readings which are read during this period from the beginning of Adar all the way till the month of Nisan. What are those 4 special Torah readings? We started off with the Torah reading of Shkolim, which talks about bringing the half a shekel. That was done by Rosh Chodesh Adar. That was because that when they started collecting the half a shekel. Last week we read in the Torah reading of Zachor, which is to remember what Amalek did to the Jewish people, and therefore we have a mitzvah to eradicate Amalek. And that we read always the Shabbos before Purim, because since Haman was one of the remnants of Amalek. And this week we're going to read the Torah reading about the Red Heifer. Following that, we read about the first mitzvah given to the Jewish people, which is the mitzvah of the new moon. Why do we read about the Red Heifer now? And that is because this is a preparation for the bringing of the Paschal offering. Every single Jew, in order to bring the Paschal offering on Passover, they had to be pure. Pure meaning that they couldn't come in contact with a dead body. If they did, they would have to be sprinkled with the blood of the Red Heifer, and the blood and the mixture, I should say, the potion of the Red Heifer. And once they were sprinkled, that means on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, we'll soon see, they were then sprinkled with that potion. After 7 days, they were then clean and they were able to walk into the Holy Temple, eat, if it was a Kohen, to be able to have from the special foods, and if it was an Israelite, of course, when it comes to eating the Red Heifer. Some of you may recall, we discussed many times about the second Pesach. Why is there a second Pesach for people to bring a Paschal offering the second chance? Because at the first time when the Paschal offering was brought, not in Egypt, when the Jewish people were in the desert, the first time in the desert, there was a group of people who were impure, and they were not able to bring the Paschal offering. And that's why the law of the second Pesach came about, was that if a person is impure, being that they were not prepared 7 days, because you have to have 7 clean days before you can actually be considered pure to eat from the Paschal offering. How is a person pure? Was by having this potion of the Red Heifer on them. Always we read it a month in advance, close to a month in advance, giving people that opportunity that they should be ready to get and to prepare themselves for the Red Heifer. That's why you'll notice sometimes there's a Shabbos break between Purim and the Parshas Parah, and sometimes you'll see it's right next to it like this week. And that is because it depends when Parshas HaChodesh is, when we read about the new month of Nisan. When the new month of Nisan, then Parshas Parah would be right next to it, because the closer it is to Passover, as this is a preparation for Passover. So when we talk about a preparation for Passover, this is also applicable, even today's day and age, as many opinions even want to say, that the Paschal offering, if we were to have sovereignty of Jerusalem, technically speaking, then the Jewish people of Temple Mount, then technically speaking, it's not contingent on the building of the Holy Temple. So to being pure is not contingent on the Holy Temple. For example, the Talmud talks about, the Maimonides brings us in this book of laws, and he says that the red heifer that was used by Moses, that means that Moses did, that potion continued to last all the way until Ezra. That means about 500 years, even more than that, about 1,000 years. Ezra, that means when Ezra was going back to the second temple, he made the second red heifer potion. From Ezra until the end of the destruction of the second temple and even beyond, they used another 8. There's one more red heifer that we're going to be using, and that's going to be when Mashiach comes. And that's going to be able to purify us. So we see that even after the destruction of the temple, there was still a remnant of this potion of the red heifer. What was this potion made of? This potion was made of cedar wood, blades of grass, crimson wool, earth, and natural well springs of water. This natural spring of water mixed with the blood of the red heifer. This was all mixed together, and this was sprinkled by the Kohen on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. Why? And then the Kohen himself, who sprinkled the water, this potion, he himself would become impure. Not for 7 days, but for 1 day. When we talk about this mitzvah, the red heifer, being that it even has an applicability, even after the destruction of the temple, therefore, according to many opinions, like we read last week's Torah reading, it was a biblical commandment to hear it. Most of the Torah readings we read because Moshe on Mount Sinai didn't want that Jewish people should go 3 days without studying Torah. Therefore, he made that Monday, Thursday, and Shabbat there should always be a Torah reading, so we should study Torah at least once every 3 days. The actual Torah readings that we have are only rabbinic commandments. When it comes to reading the Torah reading of Zachar to eradicate Amalek, being that the mitzvah to eradicate Amalek is a biblical commandment, so therefore the reading of the Torah is also a biblical commandment. According to some, being that we are able to do the red heifer potentially, should we have the red heifer potion, the reading of Parah is also a biblical commandment according to some, but according to most commentaries it's a rabbinic commandment. Because of it's not contingent on the Holy Temple, so therefore it still has an application, so to speak, today. What we find over here is, the bottom line is, though we can't do it technically today, because we don't have that potion of the red heifer, but it's, if we were to have its availability, it would have a practical application. But beyond the actual practical application of sprinkling the red heifer, of becoming pure, we know that there is more of a contemporary application that we can apply this in our day-to-day life. What does the red heifer mean to us in every single day of our life? And what does it mean of the technicality that if when the Kohen sprinkles it on the person, that the individual becomes pure, but the Kohen himself becomes impure? How does that happen? What are we learning from here? What does this teach us? Now let's understand what the red heifer is doing. It is purifying a person from this most severe contamination, impurity that there is in the Torah. That means in the Torah there are levels of impurity. There's a impurity that if I touch something that an animal touched, something that a dead body touched. But over here, this impurity comes from touching a dead body. In Hebrew it's called tumas mes. The impurity of touching a dead body. This is the highest level of impurity. So when the Torah tells us that a person can become pure, that a person can cleanse himself from this greatest level of contamination, it's not just a mitzvah that happened 2,000 years ago, it's a mitzvah that has a practical application for today as well. So what does this mean? So as we mentioned, any type of individual or person or even vessels or even items that may have come in contact with a dead body need to go through this process of purification. This is where King Solomon comes along and says, I know there are chukim in the Torah. I know there are statutes in the Torah which are beyond our understanding and that are super rational. But what is with this mitzvah? If it's the blood of the red heifer, if this potion of the red heifer is a purifying agent, is a cleansing agent, then why is the Kohen becoming tamei? Why does the Kohen becoming tamei? The Kohen himself should be super clean now, because he's the one that's sprinkling the red heifer. King Solomon says, I understood all the concepts in the Torah. I know all the precepts of the Torah. But when I got to this Parah Adumah, when I got to this red heifer, I said, this is wisdom that's beyond my knowledge. I can't understand it. What does this mean? So, well, first of all, why does the Torah, number one, reiterate the fact that this is a statute? And number two, there are many mitzvahs that we don't understand. Like we mentioned before, the laws of kosher, the laws of shatnez, the laws of there's about 10 of them you can talk about. They're eating pork, when the levirate marriage, different things, mixing different types of fruit, when we say that the animal has to be stoned. There's many different questions that people can ask about different mitzvahs that we say this is just because God told us to do it. Why all of a sudden does King Solomon say, this one I don't understand? On the other hand, the interesting thing is that Rashi, the commentator, brings a little bit of a rational explanation to it. The place where King Solomon says he doesn't understand, Rashi says over here, you know what? I'll give you a little bit of explanation. And he says as follows. What's the red heifer for? Because you have the cow. He says, imagine if you have a prince that makes the king's palace dirty. Who do you say should come clean it up? Little kid. You tell the mother, come clean up after your child. Same idea over here. What was the sin that the Jewish people did? The golden calf. Who's the one that's got to clean up? the mother of the golden calf. So what is the red heifer technically doing? It is cleaning up the sin of the Jewish people that it did with the sin of the golden calf. Now you want to know, why does it have to be complete without any blemish? That's one of the mitzvahs. He says because the Jewish people made a blemish, so they have to rectify it by being complete without any blemish. Why does it have to be red without even 2 hairs of black hairs in it? It's because they were sin as a sign of red, so it has to be cleansed. That they'll be able to have to come, the concept of being, that I'll clean your sins that were like red and making them white. So if we see over here that the whole idea of the red heifer was there to be able to cleanse and to rectify the sins that the Jewish people have done, it seems like a valid reason of why the red heifer was done. The Kli Yakar, a commentary on the Torah, also continues to explain, and he says the red heifer doesn't only correct the sin of the golden calf, but if you look what the red heifer does, the red heifer corrects and purifies an individual who touched a dead body. The concept of a dead body was that the Jewish people before the sin of the golden calf were going to have the ability that every single Jew, when he passes away, should only pass away with something we would call a kissing death, without any pain or suffering, that God just takes their soul, like Moses, like Aaron, like Jacob. Jacob got sick, but Moses and Aaron especially. And it says that a person, and that's why by Aaron, interesting thing, you look in the Torah, when Aaron died, his son Elazar came up and put on his clothing and came down to the Jewish people and was right away, became the high priest. And the question is, how come he wasn't impure for 7 days? Because when a person dies in that level of death, that they die in their sleep, as they want to call it, is called a kissing death, that there was no pain or suffering, they die just like that, they don't become impure. And therefore, the Kli Yakar wants to explain and say that what happened over here is because of the sin of the golden calf. The Jewish people now have to go through the process of death like everybody else. So they become impure. Therefore, they needed a red heifer to be able to rectify it, and that's why it had to be a red heifer. If they wouldn't have sinned with the golden calf, they wouldn't have to have this whole concept of the red heifer. So the red heifer is part of the completion, or part of the total helping the Jewish people get through that challenge of the sin of the golden calf. But the question is then, what's then so amazing for King Solomon that he can't figure it out about the hidden secret of the red heifer that was deeper, that the Torah has to reiterate that this is a chayik, this is a statute that you're not going to understand. And the Talmud goes on to say, and the Talmud explains, and this is what the problem, as we mentioned earlier, the struggle that King Solomon had, and what was concealed from King Solomon, is that this exact potion of ash that purifies an individual that was impure, that we just spoke about, that was impure for the sin of the golden calf, and you just explained how severe the golden calf was that the person had to be purified with, and this potion cleanses him, and this potion makes him holy, makes him able to bring the paschal offering, and all of a sudden I say, 1 second, the Kohen who sprinkles him becomes impure. How does that work out? Not only that, any person involved in the sprinkling of the red heifer becomes impure for a day in their clothing and have to wash it at the end of the day. Why? What's this oxymoron here? I have over here, seemingly on one hand, this potion, which is the most cleansing of all potions, can clean even the sin of the golden calf, so to speak. But all of a sudden, the Kohen that's doing it, he himself becomes impure. And this is what was struggling with King Solomon. And this is why the Torah reiterates more than once, saying the word about the laws of the red heifer, that this is a statute that's beyond our understanding. You know, many times, what the red heifer shows us is that there's many times, if you look at it, you have a medicine. A person says, being that that person's taking that medicine and it's helping them, let me take the medicine. It's not going to work. For one person, the medicine can help them. If that same exact person can take that medicine, it will kill them. You have insulin that helps people lower the sugar levels, and sometimes it makes their sugar levels higher. If the person's going to take the wrong type of medicine, what's going to happen? It's going to kill them. Over here you see is seemingly a potion that for one person, it's cleaning them, it's making them work. For the other person, it's hurting them. It's making them impure. And if we look a little deeper into this, we'll understand that there's over here giving us two principles in life. of how we can look at things that happen to us, that give us the ability to overcome, and our outlook that happens to a person, the feelings that happen to a person because of death, when the crisis of death happens. The second we will look at is how to help a person get through that trauma of losing a loved one. The first one is an explanation that's brought by a great rabbi of Jerusalem from the previous generation. His name was Rabbi Yosef Tzisalant. And he gives an interesting explanation in this. And he says as follows. Just to give it a better, deeper understanding, there was many times when you talk to different people, especially crisis counseling, people going through different things, what's there to tell them? There's almost nothing you can answer them, especially now. And this rabbi that was from Israel was going around talking to different people that lived through October 7th, these same people that went through October 7th, lost their loved ones on October 7th, then they have siblings fighting in Gaza, and they're fighting against the evil of the world, and they're losing their loved ones. Every day, unfortunately, hear another one. They ask, why the war? Why them? Why their children? And you listen to this, and you listen to these people talk. Your heart goes out for them. What can you tell them? Where do you see, how could they all of a sudden struggling? And the struggle is real. And the struggle is that where do they turn to? Who do they pray to? Why God to doing this to them? And the question is, how is it possible? And as we see, that when a person, and this happens unfortunately many times, that when there's a loss of a loved one, the loved one may be closer to God, but because of that, those that are here in this world are asking themselves the questions which sometimes keep them in a distance, in an ask, in a request. Why me? Where's God? And many questions that challenge their faith. And the death that causes to people pushes people to different places. Many times to ask them questions about spirituality, but also ask them questions about the real life. Why purpose of life? What are we here? We're here more in this world for? We come to realize that everything in this world is useless. Because every person, no matter how wealthy they are, goes upstairs with the same shrouds. You know the story about the fellow. There was this very wealthy fellow. Before he died, he left an envelope to his children, and he said, please bury me with the contents of this envelope. After, he said, when I die, after burial, please open up the second envelope. So, they open up the envelope right when he dies. They open up, they see it's a pair of socks. And he says, please ask the Chevra Kadisha, the people of the burial society, if they can bury me in these socks. Okay. So they go to the Chevra Kadisha and they ask him, can we be buried in the socks? He says, I'm sorry, according to Jewish law, a person's buried barefoot, only shrouds, nothing else. Yeah, but he wanted. No, this is Jewish law. Nothing. You can't even. Okay, fine. That is what it is. They keep the socks on the side, they put it inside the grave, they can't bury him with the socks. After he's buried, they open up the second envelope, and in the second envelope it says, a person can have all the wealth in the world, but when it comes time to dying, he can't even take a pair of socks with him. When it comes to a level of life, when it comes to death, gives us such an awakening that all of a sudden we start questioning everything in life. The purpose for everything in life. Why, the what's, the where's, the how's. What was it all for? Why do we all need it for? And in fact, the Kuzari explains, and many times that we talk about the ideas of mikvah, and talk about the levels of purification, of why we do purification and so on, is because any time there's a loss of life, for example, when it comes to mikvah, why does a woman go to mikvah after a menstrual period and after 7 days she then has to immerse in the mikvah? Is because then there was an opportunity to create life, and there was a loss of life, and therefore you have to go and purify. That any concept of purification is there because it teaches us about the appreciation of life. So if we look at the same ideas also, tsaras, a person who has tsaras, leprosy, is considered as if he lost life, and that tsaras we'll talk about in 2 weeks' time. But in general, crisis, especially a moment of death, helps a person quantify and qualify what life is all about. It all of a sudden gives us a moment of reckoning. Like we spoke about last week, Viktor Frankl, when he was in the concentration camps, he was able to come to that moment of reckoning and seeing the purpose in life, of what it was all about. And all of a sudden, during these dramatic moments, a person says, what? What am I here for? The Rebbe, after his wife passed away, after the Rebbetzin passed away, the Rebbe said something very interesting. He says, the Medrash tells us that when Moshe came to the section in the Torah when it talks about the impurity of when a person passes, he asked God, how does a person purify himself from such an impurity? What was Moshe's question? How does a person purify himself from such an impurity? What was Moshe's question? You take the red heifer, you sprinkle it, and that's the way you do it. Why was Moshe asking, how is he going to purify himself? The Rebbe said, and you could hear the anguish and pain when he said it, after all the explanations that you're going to give, the bottom line is the person's not here. How are you going to be able to bring it back? There's still not going to be that void in the heart that's forever going to be there. How is it possible that one can justify and explain God, who's always the giving God, is giving us everything that we need, but there's still going to be a void? All of a sudden at this time, God's taking. It's counterintuitive of what we know about God is. God is always giving, and all of a sudden when it comes to a crisis of passing, of death, God is taking, He's not giving. And therefore Moses asked, how do you rectify it? How do you come to cleansing from it? What does God say? Take the red heifer. The red heifer, you're going to slaughter it. You're going to cut it. You're going to take its blood. You're going to take its ash. And you're going to mix it in mayim chayim. Not in just regular water, but water from a wellspring. That means what you're doing is, you're taking the end of life and you're mixing it with eternal life. What God is telling the Jewish people, what God was telling Moshe was, that when a person passes away just because the body is no longer here in this world, that's not the end of life. That's not the loss of life. But on the contrary, those continue to go on for generations. The actions of what the person did is very much alive and continues to be alive. That means you're taking the dead ashes, that means the ashes of the dead, of the cow, of the red heifer, you're mixing it with the well springs, with the water, with live water. That's why it's called, it has to be from a natural spring of water, because this is what it's saying, this is bringing it back to life. But still, what do? It's painful. And a person can think about it and say, yeah, what happens? This crisis comes to the relatives of a person who has that loss. While we know the truth, and while we know that that person always lives on, however, at the end of the day, we're natural beings. We like to see things in front of us. We want to see the 3D image. We want to have that company. We know that things don't last forever, but the bottom line is that the feelings and the pain and the suffering and the void is always there. So what's the solution? And the general solution that people give, and even our sages give it many times, that every single person, we know that a person comes into this world and a person has to leave this world. And even people who leave before their time, there must have been a greater reason for it. We look at Aaron HaKohen. Moses' brother lost his 2 sons at a very young age. He was quiet, no justification. He accepted what God gave him. But he didn't look for any justification, because there is no justification. All we know, that Torah tells us, this is a statute. This is the way it is. God told us it is. I can give as many justifications. He was great, and he finished his mission, and all the wonderful things. But the bottom line is, what does God tell us? Chukah. That's the way God decreed it. There is no rationale. There are certain things in life that we come to understand and say, that the same way I don't understand this law in the Torah, I don't understand it in my life as well. The same way I can't explain it, why the Torah says this one makes it pure and this one becomes impure. Remember, there are things in life that you will never be able to explain. Don't even try finding explanations. There is no justification. This is the way it is. When a person accepts that fact, when you accept the fact that I'm not going to understand everything. King Solomon said it. I'm not smarter than King Solomon. All of a sudden, there's a certain solace. There's a certain peace, serenity. There's a certain subservience. And that's the concept of subservience. I give myself up to something which is higher and greater than me. God decreed this is the way it is. I don't understand it. I don't have to understand it. I never will understand it. And the only reason I get upset is because I think I could understand it. The moment you start to think that I should understand everything, that's when you start all of a sudden being upset and being depressed and being sad. But the moment I all of a sudden realize this, God tells me, chukah, this is the statute. This is something beyond your rationale. It happens, this is the way life is, I will never understand it, not about a 2-year-old, not about a 90-year-old. It's beyond our comprehension. A fascinating medrash tells us, when Moshe went up to heaven, Moshe comes up to heaven to get the Torah. And he sees, metaphorically, God putting the crowns on the Torah. On every letter, if you look in the Torah, the letters have crowns on them. A Nun has 3, a Hey has 1, a Lamed has 2. Every letter in the Torah has crowns. So he asks Moshe asks God, what's it needed for? What do you need crowns on the letters for? So God tells him there's going to be a time, there's going to be a great sage, and his name is Akiva. And Akiva is going to explain and understand and rationalize every single crown on the Torah. Moses said, yeah, I want to see this. I want to see this guy who is able to explain even the crowns on the Torah. So God shows him in the future Akiva ben Yosef, Rabbi Akiva, who he explains every single crown and has mountains of laws on it. And he says, but you got to go back. You can't sit in the front row. You got to sit in 8 rows back. Because these guys are way ahead of learning than you. Moshe is jealous. 1 second, I'm the one giving the Torah. They're already explaining things that are beyond my understanding, and he couldn't figure out what they're talking about. And he sees them talking back and forth, discussing. As you can understand, any Talmudic page in the Talmud goes into different conversations. What is this verse? What is that verse? And Moshe is not getting it. He's not understanding. He's embarrassed. What's going on over here? I'm the one that's bringing the Torah from Mount Sinai, and I'm looking 1,000 years ahead, more 1,500 years ahead, and they're discussing the Torah, and I don't understand it. But all of a sudden, he sees the discussion comes to an abrupt stop. One fellow asks the other, why does it say this? Why do you do that? And all of a sudden, the guy says, because that's the way Moshe said from Mount Sinai. No reason. This is the way we do it, because that's the way it was in Moshe on Mount Sinai. All of a sudden, Moshe calmed down. He says, oh, okay. That means, yes, they can have all the rationales, but the bottom line is, there's a place where it stops. I can explain it, I can rationalize, I can have all these things. Moshe turns to God and says, 1 second. If Rabbi Akiva can explain all these rationales, and he understands even the crowns on the Torah, why are you giving the Torah through me? Go give it through Moshe. Go give it to Rabbi Akiva. Go get one of those guys. They know it better than me. What did God say? Shtoik. Quiet. This is what I decided. What's going on over here? What's this conversation telling us? So over here you see two conversations that happened here. There was a rational conversation and there was a super rational conversation. The first conversation, Moshe asks, why are you putting crowns on the Torah? God says, I'll explain it to you. Go look. These are the people that are explaining it. There's people studying it. He wanted to see how come he didn't understand. He recognized, okay, there's a limit of their understanding, but ultimately Moshe was the one that brought it from Mount Sinai, and therefore he felt comfortable with it. What was the second question? His second question was why, not the what. The why. Why are you choosing me? Choose somebody else. He's asking God a question. He says, why? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why are young people dying early? He's asking God, why? Why are you choosing me? Why choose me? Choose somebody else. To the why, what does God answer? He doesn't show him Akiva. He doesn't show him rationale. He doesn't show that this guy may have ended up a who knows what. He says, when it comes to why, quiet. That's what I decided. What is God telling us here? Something very fascinating. When it comes to the what, we can discuss and we can elaborate. But the bottom line is, we know, why is my tefillin black? I can give you 10 rationales why the tefillin's black. But the ultimate reason why my tefillin's black is because that's what God gave me on Halacha Lo Moshe Sinai, to Moses on Mount Sinai. Intertwined in that same story, I am telling you, why was Moshe given on Mount Sinai? Because that's what God decided. So the same way when it comes to the what, I don't question and I say this is what God gave on Mount Sinai, so too when it comes to the whys in life, I shouldn't question and know that this is what God gave on Mount Sinai. This is what we see from here when we intertwine and we recognize and we realize that the knowledge that there is in the Torah, the same way it's greater than the understanding and comprehension of the human being, the same way that we as people, our knowledge is limited to what we can understand and comprehend in Torah, or so too we shouldn't think we can figure out all the mysteries of the universe and understand why God does everything. There are certain questions that will forever stay unanswered, and there's nothing wrong with that. The same when you can go to sleep at night and you know that you don't understand everything that you studied in Torah, go to sleep at night, rest assured you don't understand everything why God does everything. And guess what? You'll never understand. Because if you would, you'd be God. So the what and the whys in life work together. And the same way we look at them in Torah, we also understand them in the daily life. This is the first lesson that we can learn from the Red Heifer. While we don't understand the details of the Red Heifer, we don't understand why this potion makes this person impure and this person pure, we also don't understand other things in life. And as long as we come to that resolution and recognizing that it's a statute of God, this is the way God set the world, it gives us that serenity. That's one way of looking at it. Now let's take it a step further in the way Hasidism and the Rebbe explains it as follows. And says as follows, that the actual secret of the Red Heifer is not only telling me about how I have to view the whys in life, but actually teaches me and helps me to overcome that why, my questions, that drama. Who does God give the responsibility to be able to purify the person? It's the Kohen. You may think that the Red Heifer there to sprinkle on the person who's the one being purified, who's the one being helped, is the person that was impure. But in fact, what the Torah is telling me over here, who's being helped is even more so as being the Kohen. And think of it this way. And this helps us understand this whole idea. Is that how do you help an individual get out of their rut, get out of their impurity, is by you becoming impure a little bit yourself. Not severely, but lightly. When you become lightly impure, then you can help another person become pure. Think of it this way: when you come to do nichum avelim, pay a shivukol. There's a law when it comes to paying shivukol that who's the one that has to start the conversation? The mourner. Why the mourner has to do the conversation, start the conversation? Many people think, why am I coming to do a shivukol? You're coming to do a shivukol, you want to feel very righteous, that you did the right thing, and you're so empathetic. And you came, and this person suffered a loss, and by you coming, you're going to make them feel better. And what does the Torah tell you? I have news to tell you. You know who's feeling better because of it? You, the visitor. That's why. Who's the one that starts off with consoling? The mourner. Because the mourner is helping the visitor more than the visitor is helping the mourner. And why is that? And that is, if you look in any situation, and you look in the way it goes about it, in any time, if you think about an educator, a teacher sees a child doing something wrong. A parent sees a child doing something wrong. What's the first reaction they can do? They can yell at him and tell him you're a bombastic imbecile, you're never going to be anything about yourself, and give him a whole lecture for about 14 minutes to be able to say, if the kid's going to sit through and even listen to it, and say how terrible the thing that he did. What did the teacher accomplish at that moment? In one ear, and maybe out the other ear, or maybe even not even in the first ear. Very few lessons have people learned from the reprimand that they've been given. How can he get the child to be able to look at a different avenue, to see and believe that he can do something differently. Over here, the educator has to take a moment, and instead of looking and talking down to the student, to be able to stand alongside the student and together lift the package and deal with what they're dealing with. This type of instinctive way of being able to negate the bad can shake a person up, can tremble the end of a person by telling them how terrible they were, but you're not going to remove it. You're not going to get rid of it. In order to get rid of it, you need to actually go stand side by side, shoulder to shoulder, come level to level, and so to speak, even at times give a legitimacy to what the child is going through, and only then can you hope that they'll get through it. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov always used to give this fascinating parable about it. There was once this prince that went meshuga. He thought he was crazy, this prince, and he thought he was a chicken, and decided he's not sitting by the table. He would only stay under the table and only eat the crumbs that were under the table. They brought all the therapists in the world to be able to get this prince from out of under the table, and they would all sit there and yell at him and say, "Come on, get out from there, you don't belong there. Well, come and do what you got to do." And the prince wouldn't listen. And the prince would just stay under the table and act like a rooster and eat all the crumbs from the bottom. They had nothing to do. Nobody knew what to do. Finally, one therapist came. And this therapist got down on the floor and started playing like a rooster. And they were sharing the crumbs. And they were dealing with, and they were playing under the table together. Everybody looked at this therapist, he's crazy. But after a week that the two were playing under the table together, the therapist and the prince became such good friends. And they were playing, and all of a sudden he convinced them, you know what, let's try going out from under the table. Let's try sitting on a chair. Let's try behaving like human beings. And all of a sudden he got him back to a normal person. What was Rabbi Nachman of Breslov's explanation? What is this a parable for? Is if a person were to come over to this prince and yell at him and say, "Take off those clothes, you're a shlump, you're a shematem, be a mensch," what would he do? He would not listen to him. What did this person do? He didn't deny that he's a prince, but he legitimized his situation, the troubles and the trauma that he was going through. And therefore he was then able to bring him up to the level that he needed. In order to save somebody, if I see a person's drowning, you can't stand from the bridge and yell, "Jump, go, save, come." You got to jump into the water, get yourself wet, and that's the only way you're going to save somebody. The bottom line is, the Rebbe explains, that what does this teach us? That in order to bring people together, you need to be able to have a relationship with the person that you're helping and the person that is helping. How do you create that relationship? The story that the Rebbe tells of the second Chabad Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe. The second Chabad Rebbe was once having a big private audience, and all of a sudden in the middle he stopped the audience. He said, "Why?" And then after a while, after a half hour, an hour, he continued. So they asked him afterwards, "Why did you stop?" So he says, "Whenever a person comes to ask me a question, how to be able to find a path and spiritual journey that they're going on, I have to find within myself the challenge that that person's going through. And therefore, if I can't find it within myself, I cannot help him." And over here, somebody came to me, asked me a question, and I had a hard time finding where do I have that issue, until I was able to find it within myself, and only then was able to help him. Same story told about the Rebbe Marash, the fourth Chabad Rebbe, that one time, he was more of on the heavier side, but at one time after a private audience, he would change his clothes in the middle. And he was very sweating from it. And his helper was not the kindest individual that used the best choice of words. And once mumbled to himself, why is he sweating so much? What's happening? To which the Rebbe Marash responded, the fourth Chabad Rebbe said, "Every time a person comes in to meet me in a private audience, I have to dress and undress. That means I have to be able to get myself into position to feel in need of that individual." His two sons were once playing Chassid and Rebbe. The Rebbe Rashab, which was the fifth Chabad Rebbe, and his older brother, Zalman Aaron. And he said the older brother was going to be the Rebbe, and the Rebbe Rashab was going to be the Chassid. So he came into him and he said, "Okay, I got a problem." And he tells him the solution. So his younger brother tells him, he says, "You're not a good Rebbe." He says, "What do you mean? What did I do wrong?" He said, because you didn't go, "Oy," you didn't feel my pain. If you want to help somebody else, you need to be able to feel their pain. When the Torah tells us that over here that the priest, the Kohen, becomes impure when he sprinkles the other individual to make him clean, why does he become impure? Because if you want to purify somebody else, you can't purify from a distance. You have to be able to feel the pain. You have to be able to feel that exact impurity to be able to purify that individual. You have to have that empathy. You have to have that relationship to be able to feel that weakness that the person's going through. It's easy to lecture somebody from a distance, but if you don't have the relationship, you're not going to impact or affect that individual in any way, shape, or form. This is what we see as well in this week's Torah reading. This week's Torah reading is Tzav. Tzav is where God tells Aaron about the commandments of bringing the sin offering. And it also tells us about the preparations of Aaron was going through the training of the 7 days of how to learn how to be the high priest. One of the great masters of the Polish dynasty of great Rebbes explained something very fascinating. He says, why was it Aaron to be chosen to be the high priest? Why was Aaron chosen the one to bring the sacrifices and the sin offering of the Jewish people? Why was Aaron the one there to light the menorah? Because everything that Aaron did was to bring the Jewish people to absolute repentance, to the highest level of teshuvah. Who was the right person to do it? Only Aaron. Because Aaron himself had a little bit of that problem. He was there by the sin of the golden calf. He himself felt a little bit of the Jewish people's pain and suffering that they had, that distance, that discord with God. And therefore he was the one to bring them to the level of teshuvah. He was there to bring the sin offering. He was there to light the menorah and inspire them. Moshe was a teacher, but Moshe had no sins. Moshe was on high when the Jewish people went through the sin of the golden calf. He didn't have the same challenge that the Jewish people did. He wasn't relatable to them in that level. So he couldn't help them, bring them to the level of tshuva. Moshe was that powerful light that gave them the Torah and taught them. But to inspire them to change, had to be Aaron. Because he was there together with them. He felt their pain. He had a little bit of their issue. A similar thing you find, that how come you don't find anywhere Moshe's children were anywhere leaders? Moshe asked his children should be leaders. God said, no, they're not the one. Yeshua is going to be the one. Because they were never in Egypt. They never went through that pain. They weren't able to feel what it means to be a slave. I can talk to you about freedom from today to tomorrow. But if you never experienced it, you never were a slave. How can I tell you what freedom is? The same idea you talk about, this was in fact a difference between Yaakov and Yosef. When Yaakov, right before his passing, what was Yaakov there? Yaakov tells his son Yosef, swear to me you're going to take me out of Egypt. Why? He didn't trust him. He brought his whole family down to Egypt, fed them, took them, whatever he needed. Why did he have to swear to him? Because Yaakov and Yosef worked on different playing fields. Yaakov believed you will be more helpful to the Jewish people if I'm in Israel. And the Jewish people, while they're going through their suffering in Egypt, if I'm outside Egypt, I'll be able to help them, I'll pray for them, I'll be able to help them. Yosef believed I'll be able to help them if I'm there with them. And that's why Yosef stayed in Egypt. And therefore Yaakov tells Yosef, I need you to swear to me because I know this is not what your belief is. I know you believe that I'm better off staying here to help the Jewish people. That's why I'm telling you I don't believe to be someplace else. Yaakov believed that the way to help was from the outside, while Yosef believed all the help is on the inside. There's a fascinating story told about once there was this young girl who was going through a tough time. Her parents, let's say, neglected her, and therefore was from one foster home to another foster home. And of course you can imagine that didn't show well in her scholastic studies and behavior in school. One day she was misbehaving in class. The teacher had enough and said, listen here, you disturbed the class. Today after class you're going to be the one to clean up the class. You're going to have to stay after school detention. Your job is to clean up the class. But luckily for her, just a few weeks earlier, an angel came into her life who adopted her, brought her into a loving and kind family. It was 5 o'clock already. She didn't come home. The father of the family went to school to see where this new adopted daughter is. She didn't come home. He comes to the class. She has detention. Her job was to clean the class. He tells her, he says, listen here, wow. He tells this newly adopted girl that he has. You must have some strength that you're able to get through these challenges. God must have blessed you with supernatural strengths. One day you're going to conquer the world. He says, let me help you. She took one broom, he took another broom, and together they swept the class, cleaned it up. Her walk home, she said, I'm carrying the backpack. Boy, do I feel lighter. Boy, do I feel stronger. Am I going to be able to overcome any challenges? And with that, she excelled in her class and ended up being the valedictorian of the school. What was it? What changed? Was either I tell you you're a loser, or I see that you have newly found strength. I relate to you. I come down to you. I come to your level and I say, like the mourner who is sitting and mourning for their loved one, they begin to console because they realize that they are now giving strength to those who come to visit them. When we are able to be together on somebody at their level, not talk to them from aloof, but to be able to sympathize and empathize with them and where they're at, we have the ability to change together with them. And this is what the Torah tells us. When this individual was coming along and sprinkling the blood of the Parah Adumah, the potion of the Parah Adumah, of the Red Heifer on the person that was impure, he wasn't just helping that person become pure, but he was helping himself. The Kohen became greater because of it. Did the Kohen become Tamei? Did he become impure because of it? For sure he did. But he also became purer because of it as well. When we help another person, when we go save another, make ourselves wet to save a person who's drowning, when we make ourselves dirty to be able to get into the mud to help another person schlep them out, we become cleaner because of it. You think you're helping them, but really, as in the story of the calf and the cow, as the Talmud says, more than the calf wants to nurse, the cow wants to be able to give it nurse. More than the calf wants the milk, the cow wants to nurse. More than we think we're helping that person, we are being helped. More than the Kohen was actually putting the potion and making that person pure, was he becoming pure. We help ourselves by helping another person, by being empathetic for another person. So the next time we see a person who may be struggling, a person who may be down in their times, we have questions that are unanswered, a person's going through a dramatic, tough time in life. It's easy to lecture and say, there's reasons for it, it's supposed to happen, and all the other wonderful things that we can say. But the question is, what do we have to feel with them, their pain? As a story, and I'll finish with this one last story. There was once a child, wasn't such a child, a person who came into the Rebbe after a very tough time, going through a traumatic time in life, came crying into the Rebbe's room. And all the Rebbe did was cry with the person. And they walked out, and they felt better. It's not what we say, it's how we make the person feel. And this is what the Parah Adumah tells us. It's not about what the Kohen did. The Kohen became impure himself, and that's what made the other person pure.